Before we get going, I just want to remind everyone, we have live Spanish interpretation available today. So Spanish speakers, please go to the globe icon that says interpretation on the bottom of your Zoom viewer, and you can select the Spanish audio channel option. The session is also being recorded so that we can provide it to anyone in the community as a resource after this webinar ends. So my name is Barrett Berger. I am one of the executive assistant district attorneys here in the Westchester County DA's office, and I'm going to serve as our moderator for this forum today. Our forum is going to cover several aspects of gun safety. First, we're going to discuss New York's new gun safety laws, which, as you may know, were enacted both in response to the devastating shootings in Texas and in Buffalo, and also to the United States Supreme Court's ruling overturning New York's concealed carry law. We're going to hear from our district attorney, Mimi Roca, about what we as prosecutors in this office are doing to address gun crimes. We're going to hear from representatives from Moms Demand Actions, one of the most important leaders in gun safety, and they'll speak about safe storage practices. We're also going to learn about ghost guns today from one of my colleagues here in the DA's office. After we hear from the district attorney, I'll be back on to talk about extreme risk protection orders and New York's red flag laws, what they are and how they can be used. And don't worry, we're going to save time at the end of this forum for questions and answers. If you do have questions, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom panel of the Zoom window where you can put in any questions that you have. You can put them in English or Spanish, and time permitting, we'll try our best to get through as many of these questions as possible. I'll also be consolidating any repeat questions into one so that we can get through as many as possible. So as we get started, I'd like to welcome our district attorney, Mimi Roca.
Hello, everyone. I am District Attorney Mimi Roca, and it is really my honor to be here, to be your DA, and to be here with you today to talk about such an important and timely topic. Today, we're here to provide valuable information to you, our Westchester community, on gun safety measures, laws, tips, resources, and to answer as many questions as we can. We're going to talk about ways that we can band together because we're really in the trenches in a fight together against gun violence. And we want to acknowledge the proliferation of guns and how the gun epidemic is affecting our communities, our children, our families across the country, but even here in Westchester. Just this weekend, we had 3 separate shooting incidents in Yonkers. Fortunately, none of those were fatal, but of course, there are physical injuries and there are psychological injuries for the people who experience those shootings and for our communities who hear and read about them. So we're going to try to talk through as many ways as possible that we can be proactive in working against and preventing gun violence. Now, as you heard, some attorneys from my office will be coming on to share valuable, insightful information about New York's red flag laws and other ways, other tools that exist to empower you to take action when necessary, because equipping our community in gun violence prevention saves lives. Now, I want to say a quick word about, first of all, the people in my office, the prosecutors, the investigators, and the staff, who work tirelessly every single day on cases involving many things, but especially involving gun violence, with domestic violence victims, with people who are shooting victims. They work with these victims every single day and pour their heart and soul into these cases. And I'm so grateful to them for their dedication and hard work, and to our law enforcement partners, the police across this county, federal, state, and county and local partners who work so hard every day to help keep us safe. And I'm also very grateful for the participation in this forum and in everything that we do with guns, our advocacy partner, Moms Demand Action. The local Westchester, New York chapter is truly one of the most dedicated group of volunteers in this country. They have been instrumental in
I
leading
already
the
made
movement.
her.
They have been instrumental in leading the movement for gun sense legislation. So before we get to our different presenters, let's go over a few of the action items that have happened recently in Albany and Washington that I know are on all of our minds. First of all, after Uvalde, the horrible tragedies in Uvalde and Buffalo, our Governor Hochul signed a sweeping package of bills that expanded, amongst other things, New York's red flag laws. And let's just pause for a second. As you heard, ADA Barrett Berger is going to be talking later about red flag laws, but I want to just pause to tell you very briefly what they are in case you're not familiar. They're also known as ERPOs, Extreme Risk Protection Orders, and it's basically a tool for authorized parties to seek a temporary removal of weapons from someone who is showing red flags or signs that they might be a danger to themselves or to others. I was honored to join all the other DAs from around the state and lawmakers in June when Governor Hochul signed 10 different bills that strengthened our already very strong gun laws, including the strengthening of these red flag laws, which, for example, now allow health practitioners to be petitioners for red flag orders. So previously it was law enforcement and schools, and now under the new amended law, it also includes health practitioners, which is a valuable tool. As you know, the Supreme Court recently, the US Supreme Court invalidated New York's century-old concealed carry law in the landmark case of New York Rifle and Company versus Bruin. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in response to that ruling, Governor Hochul called a special session of the New York State Legislature to pass new legislation. And that new legislation, if we can put up the next slide, allows for permit and licensing updates, which basically say that if you are 20, you have to be 21 years old to purchase semi-automatic weapons. You have to have good moral character, which is defined, and take a fire safety course. So basically, continuing to have some reasonable limitations on certain kinds of gun purchases. It also bans body armor sales, which is something that we have seen in some of our seizures here in Westchester, believe it or not. It requires mandatory monthly checks on license holders. It has the expanded ERPO or red flag petitioners, and as I mentioned before, and new safe storage laws. Ammunition sales are now tracked and require background checks. And it has a definition for certain sensitive locations, which you can see listed here, where concealed weapons will continue to be banned. So it is a different approach to putting, again, reasonable limitations on concealed weapons after the Supreme Court's decision. Similarly, at the federal level, we had the first action in 3 decades where the US Senate passed and President Biden signed a bipartisan gun safety bill, which made some progress finally at the federal level, which we absolutely need in working towards gun safety. For example, that bill closed what's called the boyfriend loophole, which means that now someone who has either an order of protection against them or a domestic violence conviction against them cannot purchase or own a firearm, even if they don't fall into the somewhat limited definition that it previously of being married to or in a living relationship. So even if you're just a quote boyfriend, you now are covered by the statute that prohibits buying or owning a gun if you have these domestic violence convictions in your background. Next slide, this chart shows how, as the state stepped into action on strengthening our gun laws, we can see how New York has been a national leader in strong gun safety legislation. And this data shows for Moms Demand Action shows one of our value for Moms Demand Action shows the impact of our gun laws. It shows how it helps to keep gun violence incidents down in a state like New York, where we have very strong gun laws. You know, I have talked often about gun safety, and obviously I'm talking about it as your DA. I'm also talking about it as a mother myself. This is something that is hugely important to me professionally, personally. I can't think of any issue more important than keeping our children, our families, our communities safe. So one of the things that I did in early June is released what I call a 5-point gun safety plan, which is a proactive agenda of what my office has been doing and is doing and will continue to do to address this crisis. But I really wanted to sort of get it all in one place so people could understand some of the important work that we're doing. First and foremost, we want to get illegal guns off our streets. There will always be people who want to do harm or try to do harm, but we get as many guns as we can off the streets through seizing them and removing them through lawful search and seizures, including, of course, ghost guns, which we're going to talk about. We are planning to do, we have done and are planning to do gun buybacks. And we work on intelligence and data sharing amongst law enforcement at every level, the local level, county, state, and federal, because that kind of sharing of information and data allows us to better track guns, where they're coming from, the origins of them, and better target the places where those illegal guns are coming from so that we can try to get them off the street. Of course, being a district attorney's office, our other main priority is to prosecute gun crimes. We don't want them to happen, but if and when they do, we will prosecute traffickers, we will prosecute people who perpetrate violence with guns very aggressively. We use what's called a precision prosecution model. We launched a gun and gang initiative with many of our major police departments and our county police department partner, as well as our federal law enforcement partners. And that, again, allows a better sharing of information and resources. But the precision prosecution model allows us to focus on repeat offenders, the most violent offenders, and really use our resources in the most targeted way possible. We, of course, will be investigating, we have been, ghost guns, including tracking their sales, targeting people who are trying to make ghost guns in their own homes, and crack down on people who do this either in a trafficking kind of way or for their own personal use, because ghost guns are illegal. Of course, we are being very proactive, as you can see today, and as you will hear more about, in the education to our community and to the people who need to know how to use the tools of the red flag laws. So we are reaching out to schools, to healthcare providers, to our law enforcement partners to help train them both in the ERPO training, how to file the petition, what to look for, and in tracking the ERPOs so that we can figure out, again, which communities are these being used the most in, where are they the most effective, where do we need to put extra resources in, and in educating people about the safe storage program, because keeping guns that are not safely stored out of the hands, especially of children, is a huge preventer of suicide and other kinds of bad uses, obviously, of even legally owned weapons. The other part of the 5-point gun plan is early intervention and approach to mental health issues. So we are putting an emphasis on diversionary type programs that offer mental health and other treatment to people who are involved early on in the criminal justice system, who have non-violent offenses. It might be their first offense or their second offense. And our goal is to get them the kind of services and support that they need with our partners in the county government, in the Department of Mental Health, community partners, to get them out of the criminal justice system. To me, that this kind of early intervention is preventing the violent crime of not necessarily tomorrow, but 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So we have to take a more immediate, aggressive approach when violent crime is committed now. But when we're talking about people who are starting to show signs of going down that path, we want to provide them with other options, other services, and try to prevent them from becoming a regular part of the criminal justice system altogether. And the last part of this plan is that we are very serious about fighting extremism. And obviously that is something that requires both intelligence and the analysts and investigators in our office, in our Crime Strategy Center, as well as our partnerships with law enforcement across this county, the federal partners, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and of course the county RTC, Real-Time Crime Center, which provides valuable information in this arena. So now I'm going to turn this over to Barrett Berger again, who will be, I believe, talking about extreme risk protection orders, which are probably one of the most vital and useful tools in removing firearms from the wrong hands.
So it's not a webinar unless somebody doesn't unmute themselves, right? Thank you, DA Roca. I am going to talk about New York's red flag laws and extreme risk protection orders. These red flag laws are one of the most important tools that we have to fight gun violence. And here in New York, we are really fortunate to have very strong red flag laws that we can use. Now, as I'm going through these slides, I'm going to try my best not to make this too lawyerly, and not just because nobody wants to hear that much from lawyers, but honestly because these aren't tools just for lawyers, and they're not tools just for law enforcement either. This ERPO process, these red flag laws, are for all of us. They're for parents, they're for educators, medical professionals, and people in the community who see something and want to say something. So this message is really for all of us that are concerned about gun violence and how we can actually take a proactive step to fight it. So what is a red flag law? So when someone is in crisis, whether that's they're a threat to themselves, maybe they are suicidal or having suicidal thoughts, or whether they are a threat to others, they can often exhibit clear warning signs. And family members, teachers, doctors, neighbors, they are often the first people to actually see these warning signs. These red flag laws and the ERPO process that I'll talk about give people who see these warning signs a way to intervene and to temporarily prevent someone in crisis from accessing firearms. So you're going to hear me talk today about ERPOs. This is an acronym that refers to an extreme risk protection order, or an ERPO. And so what is an ERPO here? An ERPO is a mechanism that allows certain groups of people, so like I said before, doctors, teachers, loved ones, or law enforcement, to petition a court directly for one of these ERPOs to temporarily restrict somebody's ability to possess guns or to buy new ones. And as we're going to talk about today, these ERPOs, they really do save lives because they allow people who are the most likely to notice if somebody is suffering or if somebody is a threat to actually do something to stop them. We can go to the next slide. So one question that comes up, why do we need ERPOs? Why do we need red flag laws? Well, the short answer is because in most situations where there is violence, including mass shootings, there were warning signs. In 56% of mass shootings, the shooter exhibited some type of dangerous warning sign before the shooting. Now, this isn't 100% of them. This is not going to catch everyone who wants to commit an act of violence, but in most of these cases, there were some signs. As a parent, I am overwhelmed and honestly somewhat terrified about school shootings, particularly after the news coming out of Texas. And I know I'm not the only one here today who really feels scared every time my kids get on the bus and go to school. And there's no easy fix for this, right? There is no easy fix for stopping school shootings. But one thing we do know is that in most school shootings, in 4 out of 5 school shootings, there was at least one other person that knew about the attacker's plan and didn't do anything to report it. We know that in a large percentage of mass school shootings, the shooter actually shared threatening or concerning messages or images online, and this raised concern for others about the attack. Red flag laws allow people that see something like this to do something about it. Now, increasing public awareness about these warning signs and encouraging people to use the red flag laws is one tangible thing that we who are scared about school shootings and mass violence to do something about it. So we'll go to the next slide. The other reason that red flag laws are so important is not just for mass shootings, but also for suicide. So every year, nearly 24,000 Americans die by a firearm suicide, including more than 3,100 young people, and 6 out of every 10 gun deaths in the United States are suicides, which adds up to about 65 deaths a day. Now, we know that most gun deaths are suicides, and most suicides are committed with a firearm. Of course, there are other ways people can commit suicide, but having access to a gun makes it more likely somebody will actually die from a suicide attempt. And putting some distance between somebody who is thinking of attempting suicide and a gun makes it more likely that they will survive. So as with mass shootings, up to 80% of people considering suicide give some sign of their intentions. So going on to the next slide, who can actually file for an ERPO in New York? So you'll see the list of people, and I've talked about it. And the one thing that all these people have in common are these are people who have a unique opportunity to identify high-risk behavior and to intervene to reduce the risk of harm. So in this next slide, I'm going to give a brief overview of the ERPO process. And again, I'm going to try to keep this not as lawyerly. I would love to get into more detail. If you or your organization thinks that this is something that you'd like to hear about in greater detail, let us know. We're happy to come give this presentation, in a more detailed form. So, while I will give the preface on all of this, that while certain groups can actually file for one of these ERPOs on their own, I would always recommend reaching out to your local police, or if you're not comfortable doing that, to our office, because these are going to be the people that are most familiar with this process and they can really help you with this. So the person starting the case is the petitioner, and the person at risk of using guns is going to be the respondent. And so the case begins with the petitioner filing an application in the Supreme Court. This petition should be supported by as much proof as possible. So when law enforcement is doing these, they'll do an investigation to try to find as much evidence, both of the threats and of the person's access to guns. And the first step is really applying for what is called a temporary extreme risk protection order. So this temporary ERPO is going to be really an emergency order that a court can issue if they feel that there's an imminent risk. This will happen quickly. The judge has to make a decision on this application the same day it's filed. And this is really a temporary process, which means that this is only going to be effective for between 3 to 6 days. So this doesn't take somebody's guns away from them forever. This is a temporary measure to really address somebody that's in a state of crisis. In order to get one of these temporary ERPOs, the court has to find probable cause to believe that the respondent, the person with the access to guns, is likely to engage in conduct that would result in serious harm to themselves or others. So that's it. That's what the court needs to find for one of these first steps, the temporary ERPOs. So we can go to the next slide now. So what is the high-risk behavior that courts are going to be looking at? So I have a few examples here. This is not an exclusive list, and most of these are probably somewhat self-explanatory, right? These are things that would cause you to be nervous that somebody is going to be a threat to themselves or others. So any kinds of threats of violence, somebody's violating an order of protection. Remember, these threats or acts of violence can be put on social media. They can be things that you say to one person. It doesn't have to be direct evidence of it, though. This can be something that somebody hears through hearsay and or sees on social media. Obviously, somebody that has a history of alcohol or drug abuse and has access to a gun that would raise issues could be something that could support an ERPO. People who may be in times of mental health crisis and also have access to a firearm. So I want to flag one thing for everybody, and this is important because it is not your responsibility to assess whether a threat is legitimate. That's not your job. Law enforcement can do this. This is what they do every day, and we'd rather have any type of threatening post, any type of disconcerting behavior reported. You don't have to figure out whether it is legitimate or a hoax. That's our job. We'd rather have everything reported. We can go to the next slide. On this, these are just more examples of high-risk behavior. We've talked about most of these. So moving on to the next slide, what if there's a situation where you know about disconcerting behavior that makes you nervous that somebody is a threat, but you're not certain whether that person actually has access to a gun? Firearm use or possession is not actually required in order for somebody to have an ERPO. ERPOs can also be used to prevent future access to firearms. So again, this is not something that you, as somebody who might be raising the red flags, needs to know, well, they have 3 guns in their house. If you see somebody, for example, posting in social media that they want to shoot up a store or shoot up a school, even if you don't know that they have access to guns, report it. Law enforcement can do the rest of those checks. We can go on to the next slide. So at the end of this process, there'll be a hearing for what's called a final ERPO. Now, the final ERPO is a lot more permanent. This will actually prohibit the respondent from having possession of guns, from acquiring new guns for up to a year. So this is something that has a higher standard of proof. So for that first temporary ERPO, they just needed probable cause. At the final ERPO hearing, the burden of proof needs to be clear and convincing evidence that the respondent is likely to engage in conduct that would result in serious harm to themselves or others. So if a judge grants one of these final ERPO petitions, this can bar somebody from having firearms or getting new ones for up to a year. And only a judge can actually terminate one of these ERPOs. So in closing, I just want to say that ERPOs are really one tool that law enforcement has to respond quickly and safely to these types of threats. But they're only effective if people actually know about them and use them. So part of our mission here is to increase public awareness about these laws that already exist. We would love to come to your school, your PTA meeting, your law enforcement training, your community gathering. We would love to talk about these laws, talk about how they're being used, and talk about what people should be looking out for in the community. Because again, red flag laws are only as effective as the people that actually know about them. So all of these slides are going to be available on our website. So I gave a lot of information there, but it will be available. I'd like to now turn it over to Catherine Schulwater and Adriana Pence from Moms Demand Action, and they're going to walk us through a safe firearm storage program.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So thanks everyone for joining us today. You guys can start the slides for our, there we go. We'll be talking about BeSMART, which is a program developed by Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America to bring parents and all adults concerned about kids, guns, and safety, and bring them together to talk about that. As Barrett said, my name is Catherine Showalter, and I'm a Moms Demand Action volunteer. I have 3 adult children, and I wish that I knew about this program when they were younger. Incidents of gun violence have been on the rise, and it's hard not to turn on the TV and hear about another mass shooting. Gun sales increased during the COVID-19 pandemic, which in turn increase the likelihood of more children gaining access to firearms, putting them at risk of unintentional shootings, gun suicide, gun violence in their community, and on school grounds. When guns aren't properly stored, tragedy can strike, and whether it's a child finding a firearm and injuring or killing themselves, or someone stealing it and using it to commit a crime. This is an issue that has been only getting worse. 2021 was the worst year on record for unintentional shootings by children since Everytown started tracking these incidents in 2015. The issue of gun violence has instilled fear in parents, educators, students, and leaders in our community. But we can take action together to help keep our schools safer. One important place to start is by practicing and encouraging secure storage in every home, secure gun storage in every home. The BeSMART campaign was developed to reduce the deaths and injuries and trauma that result when children gain access to firearms. And the program emphasizes secure storage is always the adult's responsibility and encourages individuals to take 5 simple steps to keep kids and families safe. And that's really what we're going to share with you this afternoon. Okay, yeah, go back one slide, please. Thank you. Let's start with some sobering statistics. And this is heartbreaking to me. Firearms are now the leading cause of death among children and teens in the United States. As adults, we're responsible for keeping our children safe. And that's why it's crucial for us to ask other adults if they own guns and how they're stored when our children visit their homes or ride in their cars. As the slide shows, more than 1,600 children under the age of 18 are killed with guns in the US every year, an average of 5 children every day. An even more earth-shattering statistic that's hard to believe is a reality in a first world country. Every year, 350 children living in America under the age of 18 gain access to a firearm and unintentionally shoot themselves or someone else. We all need to worry about this issue. When children in America are killed with guns, the majority of those deaths, 53%, are homicides. That's nearly 900 children per year, and another 700 children die by firearm suicide each year, and 90 are unintentionally shot and killed. So this is the reason we're here today and continue to spread awareness wherever we can, because most people aren't aware of these facts or that it's happening every day in communities all over the country. And don't think it's not happening in your own town or city, because guns are everywhere, even here in Westchester. As most of you know, this country has more guns, not this county. This country has more guns than people. Next slide, please. We know that approximately 5.4 million children in the US live in a household with at least one loaded, unlocked gun. And as I said, this number has increased in light of the surge in gun sales during the pandemic. While school shootings and mass shootings typically make national headlines, the reality is that for children under the age of 13, gun homicides most frequently occur in the home. What's more, we know that in incidents of gunfire on school grounds, up to 80% of shooters under the age of 18 obtained the guns they used from their home or the homes of relatives or friends. This is why New York State's gun storage and safety laws are so important. Okay, next slide, please. I know this is an emotional issue, and we may come from different walks of life. Many of you may be parents, some are gun owners, some are not. You may have had a personal experience with guns, or some of you may have been impacted by gun violence. We believe that most gun owners want to be responsible gun owners, so we are here today to talk about what all of us, gun owners and non-gun owners alike, can do to make sure children do not have unsupervised access to guns. For now, let's leave all the politics at the door and agree on these 3 things as a baseline. We all want our kids to grow up happy and healthy. We each have the right to make responsible decisions about how to protect our homes, families, and communities, including whether or not to have a gun in our home. If we can prevent even one child death or injury or gun death or injury, it's our responsibility to do so. Next slide, please. Okay, it's important to remember that even if you are practicing secure storage, or if you don't have a gun in your home, you can't be sure about other homes. You can't be sure about how responsible other people are being. And that's where our program called BeSMART becomes helpful. So what can we do? secure firearms, model behavior, ask about guns in the home, recognize the role guns play in suicide, and tell others about the program. I'm going to turn this over to Adriana Pence, and she's going to take you through the 5 steps. Adriana is an Everytown Survivor Fellow who lost her brother to gun suicide, and she's also a Moms Demand Action volunteer.
Thank you so much, Catherine. We can go to the next slide. Oh, we're here already. I have the pleasure of walking you through the acronym of BeSMART in a little bit more detail. So the first letter of SMART is the S, which represents secure. So secure your guns in homes and vehicles. The majority of children in gun-owning households know exactly where the gun is stored. And we shared this statistic earlier, but I'm just going to repeat it again, which is we know that in the incidents of gunfire on school grounds, the majority of shooters under the age of 18 obtain their guns from their home or the homes of relatives or friends. So when we talk about securing guns, what exactly do I mean? Guns should be stored, locked, and unloaded with ammunition stored separately. Hiding a gun is not securing a gun. We know that a hidden gun can lead to tragedy. So some commonly used secure storage practices include using a cable lock, lockbox, or firearm safe, as well as storing firearms, again, unloaded with ammunition stored separately. Unsecured guns also contribute to a staggering number of guns stolen each year. An estimated 380,000 guns are stolen from private gun owners every year, and gun owners were 3 times more likely to have a gun stolen if they carried a gun in the last month. Research also suggests that nearly 1/4 of stolen guns are taken from cars. So storing a gun in a glove compartment or underneath a car seat is not considered secure storage. Moving on to the M. M stands for modeling behavior. So it's important to model responsible behavior. Every law-abiding adult has the right to decide whether or not to have a gun in their home, but you cannot rely on the curiosity of kids not to find a gun. One study showed that the majority of children are aware of children that live in homes where their guns are aware of where their parents store their guns, and more than 1/3 reported handling their parents' guns, many doing so without the knowledge of their parents. Nearly 1/4 of parents did not know that their children had handled the gun in their house. So keep in mind that kids may feel, if you're a parent or you have children in your neighborhood, in your community, kids feel a variety of emotions about guns, from curiosity to fascination to fear. And as adults, again, it's our responsibility to prevent that easy access to guns. It's also important that we all talk to kids about gun safety. That is just a precaution, not a guarantee. One study found that young children who go through a week-long gun safety training are just as likely as children with no training to approach or play with a handgun when they find one. So modeling responsible behavior means that smart adults make sure that kids don't have that opportunity to access guns. Make it a part of normal safety conversations you have with your kids. And you can keep the language as simple as possible. If you see a gun, don't touch it. Tell an adult right away. So that said, you can't control the environment that your child is in all the time. So it's also important to teach them not to touch a gun if they come across one, real or pretend, and give them the tools to get out of dangerous situations and to alert an adult. As an adult, it is all of our responsibilities to do everything we can to prevent them from being put in dangerous situations. Another great reference to use is BeSmartForKids.org, which has materials and best practices for how to talk to children and teens about guns, if that's something you want to learn more about. And so the next letter is A for ask. The A in SMART is ask about unsecured guns in other homes. Every year, nearly 350 children living in America under the age of 18 gain access to a firearm and unintentionally shoot themselves or someone else. This is an issue we all need to worry about, whether it's your gun or somebody else's. It could be your child. That's why it's so important to ask other parents about guns and secure storage. We talked a little bit about how how dangerous the situation has been with gun ownership since COVID. We know that between March and December of 2020, there was more than a 30% increase in unintentional shooting deaths by children of themselves or others compared to the same time in 2019. And that's just another reason why you need to ask about firearms in the homes of in the other homes where your children visit. It's easy to make it a part of the general safety conversation you have if you're sending your child to a new home. You can email or text another parent in the home where you're sending your child. It's easy to add it as a topic of conversation if you're asking about anything else, if your child is having a play date. There's no reason to be shy or feel awkward about asking if there are guns in the home. The alternative is always, the alternative to not asking could be very dangerous and it could be deadly. So some examples of other topics that typically parents ask about when you send your child on a play date: potential allergies or pets in the home, any access to a pool, to alcohol, who's going to be home. It's a great opportunity to also ask about whether or not there are guns in the house, and if so, how those guns are stored. Next slide, please. The next letter is R, which stands for recognize. So it's important to recognize the role of guns in suicide, which we've talked a bit about already during this webinar. So access to guns really means the difference between life and death, which we've touched on a few times. If you know your loved one is in distress, you might want to consider temporarily removing the gun from your home. The BeSMART website has suggestions for how you can do so safely. If you're in doubt about whether or not someone is in distress, or if you have noticed signs of distress in a loved one or friend, you can take this information into consideration. And we did share this again, so this is an important reminder. Most people who attempt suicide do not die unless they use a gun. Approximately 90% of suicide attempts with a gun do result in death, and a much higher fatality rate than any other means of self-harm. And this contributes to the fact that 40% of child suicides involve a gun. If there is no gun present in the home, or if access to a gun in the home is secure, that means locked, unloaded, and separate from ammunition, you are playing an important role in saving the lives and keeping children and teens safe from gun violence. One study found that households that locked both firearms and ammunition were associated with 78% lower risk of self-inflicted firearm injuries among children and teenagers compared to those that locked neither. And then the next letter, T, which stands for tell. And this is the final letter in SMART. This is the power of being smart. We have heard from people that because of BeSMART, they know to ask about the presence of guns before their children go to other people's homes. They've talked to family members about guns in the homes when they have recognized the role of guns in suicide, and that gun owners are modeling responsible behavior as a direct result of BeSMART. It's important the people who own and work with guns are a part of this conversation. Research shows that law enforcement, the military, hunting, and other outdoor groups are particularly effective at communicating safe storage practices. And here's a fast fact. Someone hears the BeSMART message every 21 minutes because we are working hard to increase public awareness about this program. And you can help spread the word too. So as parents and educators and leaders in our community, we're all responsible for keeping our schools safe. And by talking about BeSMART, we all can take this important step towards protecting our kids and our schools. So one final important point before closing, BeSMART is neutral on the topic of gun ownership. It does not encourage or discourage individuals from owning guns. It also does not advocate for changing gun laws. This program emphasizes the power of each and every adult to take agency over the safety of children and teens. So we encourage everyone to spread the word in the community. And the final review of the acronym one more time is BeSMART stands for S, secure all guns in your home and vehicles. M, model responsible behavior. A, ask about unsecured guns in other homes. R, recognize the role of guns in suicide. And T, tell your peers to be smart. It's a pretty simple message and it can be shared with anyone. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back over to the folks in the DA's office.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you so much, Adriana. That was a great presentation and a really important message. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Tarek Rahman, who's counsel for the DA, and he's going to give us a primer on ghost guns.
Thank you, Barrett. Afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to talk about ghost guns. I'm going to try to move pretty quickly because we are a little bit short on time. So what is a ghost gun? Ghost guns are considered by the ATF to now be the fastest growing gun safety problem facing our country. Essentially, what a ghost gun is a weapon that has no serial number, therefore it is untraceable. They can be built very easily from parts that are obtained online from many hundreds of online stores. And the kits to complete ghost guns are also available in those same stores. And they are also available with, as you can see in the picture here, some of the tools that are necessary to go from a part and parts of a ghost gun to an actual completed gun. You can go to the next slide. Ghost guns have emerged as a weapon of choice for violent criminals, gun traffickers, dangerous extremists as well. And they have been used in a lot of violent acts, including those involving shootings in schools. Next slide, please. So what is a ghost gun? Ghost guns are made primarily from unfinished frames or receivers. So that's the bottom part of a gun, or in instances like the AR-15, the receiver portion, which is pictured here on the right. Unfinished frames and receivers are often marketed as 80% complete. That means that it takes about 20% work to complete the gun. They estimate, the ATF estimates that somebody, even if you're not really well versed in this, you can figure out how to complete a ghost gun based on what's available online and the tools you can buy online in about 2 hours. The main components, again, are unfinished lower receivers, which are made primarily of metal or polymer. Must be modified through milling and drilling. But again, the jigs and the drill bits needed are often sold online. You can even buy components for an AR-15, and you can also complete that through purchases online. So this is the concern really about ghost guns, is how easily accessible they are, how anybody can order them online. You have a credit card and you have an address, you can have ghost gun parts delivered to you, and people in your own homes could be creating ghost guns right under your nose. Go to the next slide, please. So one of the important factors, concerning factors about ghost guns is that they are not traceable, but more concerning is that it allows people to bypass all of these very stringent gun licensing regulations that are in place in our state and others. So what are some of these licensing requirements? DA Roca covered a lot of these earlier. Just quickly, the age, you cannot be convicted of a felony or a serious offense. The importance of that is that serious offenses go beyond just felonies. There are misdemeanors, especially people that have been convicted of domestic violence. Misdemeanors are restricted from owning guns. But if you get a ghost gun, you can bypass all of this. You can go to the next slide, please. So what you see here are some slides showing images of what the current ATF rulings are. So on the first image on the left, you can see that they look almost identical, but the one on the left is a firearm and the ones on the right are not. And you can see that the difference is just a little bit of work that turns what is not a firearm into a firearm. So what is being done to combat this issue of the proliferation of ghost guns? Well, federally, the ATF is due to change the definition. They have changed the definition of a firearm. It's due to go into effect on August 24th of this year. And essentially what the new definition will do is it will include ghost gun parts under the definition of firearms. What that means is that all of the regulations, federal regulations that apply to firearms will now apply to ghost gun parts and ghost gun kits. We've also been doing some work here in New York about ghost guns and how legal and easy they are to get. So there are new laws in place, adding definitions into the penal law for unfinished frames or receivers and ghost guns. So now what was previously not necessarily illegal in New York is illegal as far as the possession of ghost gun parts and ghost guns. And the sale of those weapons are now also illegal in New York. So what is next? So the next issue that we have to deal with, and you'll see here on the next slide, is 3D guns. So this is something that will be very hard for law enforcement to combat because 3D guns are available. The instructions and the ability to make them don't really require anything being sent to you. You can simply go online, find the logistics for printing a 3D gun, and if you have a 3D printer, it is not that hard to print a 3D gun. Other issues we face in the future are challenges to these new laws that have been passed, challenges to the ATF definition of a ghost gun, of firearms, expanding it to ghost guns. These are all things that could be challenged in the courts and things that are right now out of our control. You can go to the next one. Thank you. So here are some stats that show what's been going on with ghost guns. Everytown USA reports that more than 2,500 ghost guns have been connected to criminal activity, as shown in 114 federal cases that took place between 2010 and 2020. Recently in New York City, the stats show an increase in the number of ghost guns that have been seized over time. Right now, year to date, as of June, actually, you see that the number of ghost guns looks on track in New York City to surpass the number that were seized last year. And here in Westchester, we have seen a marked increase in the number of ghost guns that have been recovered by law enforcement from last year to this year. That is the quick and easy on ghost guns.
Thanks so much, Tarek. We are now at the question and answer portion of our forum, and really appreciate everyone who emailed us their questions ahead of time. We received a lot of questions, so we're going to try to get through as many as possible. Just in the interest of time and to keep it relevant on gun safety, in today's forum, we're just going to focus on gun safety and refrain from opining on whether any of the recent laws have merit to any court challenges. I do want to make clear that as prosecutors, we're not lawmakers. We don't set legislation, and it's wonderful when we have the opportunity to work with legislators to help craft laws. But for today's purposes, we really just want to focus on the community response and what all of us collectively can do to help. So the first question, we'll start off with a relatively easy one, is how can we make sure that everyone in Westchester knows the information that we've covered today? So let me just first start off with throwing that up to Mom's Demand on this, since this is really something you guys focus on a lot. Catherine, Adriana, do you have an answer to how we can share this message with everyone?
Yeah, sure. How you doing? First of all, I just want to let you know, my name is Cynthia Turnquist Jones. I am also a Mom's Demand Action for Better Gun in America. And our volunteers, okay, wait, start my video. Hi, how you doing? How you doing? So as a member of Moms Demand Action, one of the things that we make sure is that we are there as volunteers and that we do presentations for PTAs. Just to let you know, I in particular did something at Mount Vernon Public Library the other day, informing parents and letting the PTA know that we have this information. And so we're able to present to school boards and community groups and keep them aware as to what is taking place. And we are also always looking for volunteers. And we are also available to do tabling events. And so tabling events at various fairs, and even, I think we should also start being a part of school events if they have football games and basketball games and things of that nature, so that our parents will be able to become informed. It's a lot of information, but at the same time, it's really good conversation. So I just want to thank you. I thought it was really great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. I'll just point out that last year, our office started a safe storage program to really spread awareness of these exact issues that we were talking about today. And we really tried to partner with every school district in Westchester County to send home this information about safe storage practices, to share this BeSMART presentation with everyone. We want to continue doing this. So to the extent that, your school, your church, your community group wants either representatives from the DA's office or partners from Moms Demand Action, we're always happy to work with you to help spread this message. So moving on to the next question, DA Roca, I'm going to turn this one over to you because it's really talking about our youth, and many of them are committing gun crimes, often because they don't have opportunities that can deter them away from a life of crime. So the question is, what can the community do together with law enforcement to keep young people, and I'll include up to 25, 26-year-olds away from guns?
So yeah, obviously this is a hugely important question because any gun violence is tragic and horrible, but particularly gun violence committed by young people. There really are two tragedies on either side of the gun in those cases. Violence prevention, interrupter type programs like SNUG, which we have a very robust active SNUG program in Mount Vernon. The SNUG programs, which is guns spelled backwards, are run by the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. So it's a state-funded program, a state-run program. My office is not, nor can or should it be involved in running SNUG, but it's something that we very much are in favor of and support and think are an important component of helping to find kids, other young people, I should say, other opportunities, beyond gangs and violence. I think there are some efforts underway to expand SNUG beyond Mount Vernon to New Rochelle, which we would absolutely support. I know there's been some additional violence prevention program funding from the state, and that's something that we very much support. For my office's part, we are investing more and more resources, time, and energy into these diversion programs that I mentioned earlier, particularly some who are focused on this young adult, emerging adult group that we call, sort of 18 to 24. So they are adults under the law. They can be held accountable and should be held accountable when they commit crimes of violence. But the goal is to provide them with other opportunities, other services, particularly at a point when that is still very much a viable option, before violence occurs. So we have very active partnerships in Mount Vernon, the Mount Vernon emerging adult part. There is a very active court in New Rochelle, and we are looking to partner with the courts on a misdemeanor mental health programs so that we can offer mental health diversion programs for misdemeanors, not just felonies, which already exists here. We also launched something called Fresh Start, which again provides the opportunity for a person to not even ever have to step foot into court if they are a first-time offender with a very low-level offense. It is something where they can sort of earn their way out of court by taking advantage of other kinds of services that are available to them. So not all of these are specifically targeted youth, but many of them are, but really aim to get at this idea of keeping people out of the criminal justice system altogether.
So Dia, Roca, I'm going to stick with you for the next one as well, because this one's focusing on, we have talked about ways that we can increase legal gun safety, such as safe storage, but what specifically is our office doing to address illegal gun violence, particularly from those that are responsible for the vast majority of the violence in our community? How are we addressing that?
I mean, this is perhaps, one of our very top priorities in this office. And something that we spend much of our resources on. We, as I mentioned, launched a gun and gang initiative in August of 2021, working with New Rochelle, Yonkers, Mount Vernon, County PD, to try and prevent violent crime using a precision policing and prosecution model, which focuses on specifically violent offenders through both short-term and long-term investigations and prosecutions. We also spend much of our time and resources on investigations into any kind of gun trafficking, proliferation of ghost guns, which ADA Rahman talked so much about. And we use traditional and non-traditional techniques, investigative techniques, to try and prevent specifically prohibited persons from possessing guns. So we really are focused in on illegal use of guns, particularly from people who are prohibited from having them altogether. And when someone does commit acts of violence with a gun, we will be aggressive in our prosecutions to hold them accountable. And we have seen that that kind of prosecution makes a difference in terms of the impact it has on communities and preventing further violence from proliferating.
I'm going to turn this one over to you, Tarek, if you don't mind. This was a two-part question. The new gun law requirements of demonstrating good moral character, the temperament and judgment to possess a weapon, and the requirement to give access to social media accounts going back 3 years apply to all classes and types of possession, or do they just apply to full carry pistol permits?
So the good moral character, it's always been in there as a requirement for licensing, but they have just recently added a definition. Not sure that it gives any more clarity, but the definition shall mean having the essential character, temperament, and judgment necessary to be entrusted with a weapon, and to use it only in a manner that does not endanger oneself or others. So there's some case law out there about what good moral character meant, but now the legislature went in and said, this is what we mean by that. As far as the social media, so that is actually only applicable to the new concealed carry permit. So you know that Bruin knocked down New York's current concealed carry law, which said basically you need to show proper cause to get a concealed carry permit. So there are new restrictions on those seeking concealed carry permits. And one of those would be, you would have to provide information about your social media content over the last 3 years so that the investigators looking into your application can see if you do indeed have good moral character based on your past 3 years of social media content. So that's not for your standard in-home permit. That's only for concealed carry.
Thank you. So I want to bring up one question that's really specifically talking about a rise of late in respect to gun arrests in New Rochelle, particularly within the 18 to 24-year-old bracket. We've talked a little bit about this, but DA Roca, what are we doing to offer people who've been arrested for gun crimes, perhaps alternative rehabilitative pathways as opposed to standard incarceration outcomes? And how are we thinking about New Rochelle specifically with this?
So, I mean, first of all, there is, as I mentioned, the emerging young adult part in New Rochelle. And, we obviously are a participant in that along with our partners in legal aid. And it's run, that one is run through the courts, but we obviously participate in that. The violence intervention programs that I mentioned, I know Sade Gilchrist of SNUG is on the Zoom and has put her information in the chat. And, they are a particularly robust group, as I mentioned, in Mount Vernon, but I know trying to expand into New Rochelle. And I think that would be a very valuable tool. I think it's really important to draw a distinction, whether it's New Rochelle or anywhere, between young adults or adults who might be showing early signs of getting involved in gangs and gang violence or gun possession, where we really want to provide opportunities to get them out of the criminal justice system altogether. And they need to be provided with those opportunities. Once the violence occurs, those are crimes that we are going to be less likely to offer alternatives to. Once the violent crime happens, those are things that we are going to prosecute very robustly. And in particular, when we have the opportunity through our investigations, if there are adults who are trying to get young people involved in these gangs and involved with guns, trying to manipulate, the laws that we have here in New York that may be more beneficial to young offenders, we will particularly target in a prosecution way, those adults.
So I'm going to just read the last question here, which is a great one to end on. It's from Nitza Gonzalez. And the question is, what can we do as a community? And this is such an amazing question because this is it. All of the information that we talked about today is hopefully relevant to what we can do as a community. That means learning more about red flag laws and ERPOs, sharing that information with our communities, learning about safe storage practices, enforcing those in our own homes, asking about it and our friends and neighbors, sharing this information with those. Again, I know I'm a broken record here, but we really just grazed the surface of all of these topics here today. We did not have the time to get into great depth about all of this, but we will. We would love nothing more than to get into great depth on all of these topics with you. So if there is ever a meeting, an event, a gathering that you think sharing this message would be helpful to our communities, public awareness on these topics is critical. So you guys are doing something just by being here today and listening to all this information. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your amazing questions. To close us out, DA Roca, any last words for us?
I just want to say that it's amazing to have this many people on here who are interested in learning about this. I'm so grateful to the people in my office who put this together and took the time to do it, and who work so hard every day on gun violence. And I want to thank especially, I know County Police Commissioner Terrence Rayner is on. The county police have been an amazing partner, and we obviously could not do this without them. And his leadership is very important to us. Senator Shelley Mayer, Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff, I know, is on. Thank you so much. We can't do this work without our legislative partners. My neighbor in the building, Clerk Tim Idoni, is on. Thank you so much, and everybody for joining us. This really is a team effort, and we appreciate your participation and interest. And you can contact our office at 914-995-3317. If you want to set up any of these programs, we are very accessible these days, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much to our interpreters. It is really a privilege to be able to offer programs like this in Spanish as well. And we obviously could not do that without you. So thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.